Statues, treasures, and cities, oh my! Join us as we have a look at some surprisingly large, recent ancient discoveries. Tall hospital guard. Archaeologists were ecstatic when they would discover an unexpected treasure in Cambodia's famous Angkor Archaeological Park. When they first began the dig, they were expecting to find a few small treasures and artifacts, or perhaps even some pottery. But what they actually discovered was so much better. That's because they found a perfectly intact statue measuring 6 feet tall, weighing nearly 440 pounds. Upon later examination, they would learn that the statue was over 800 years old. As it turns out, it's sculpted to look like a guard, and since it's so close to a hospital, researchers believe that it may have stood on the grounds of the hospital itself. There were around 102 hospitals built by the 12th century, which is rather outstanding when you imagine how far advanced these civilizations actually were. The hospital complexes consisted of wooden structures and stone chapels, and the region has seen quite a rise in popularity. However, artifacts have been hard to come by since protections for the park were instated. And so it's been hailed as one of the most important finds in recent years. A desert wine press in Israel. The Israeli Negev Desert may seem like an arid and dry area, but irrigation systems have been around since people first began to settle the area and has since been a site of agricultural activity that even thrives and prospers. Negev grapes, in particular, were important historically and made wines that were exported all over the Byzantine Empire. Archaeologists discovered an inscription on the back of a 2,600-year-old pottery shard that requested wine in exchange for assistance. And that just goes to prove that the inhabitants were devoted themselves to the production of wine in ancient times. A new find, however, would confirm that winemaking may have begun even sooner than previously first thought. A massive Byzantine wine press was discovered, which could hold up to 6,500 liters of wine. Israel would have been incorporated into the Roman Empire during the time, so the director of the excavation believes that the structure may have been used by a Roman army unit. Wine growing stopped around the 6th century, when a plague would strike the region, but it also proves that wine has been a tradition, long before the concept of Roger all day was actually a thing. Ramesses II Statue. In Cairo, archaeologists were working under some quite difficult conditions when they finally discovered an important find submerged in the mud. It was an ancient statue of Ramesses II. The joint German-Egyptian research team discovered the 26-foot quartzite statue beneath the water level of a Cairo slum. They were working at what was once Heliopolis, perhaps one of the oldest cities in ancient Egypt, and also the cultural center for the sun god. This was a city that was an important part of Greek culture, especially the Temple of Ra, which was a depository for royal records, and many of the priests of the city were well informed in matters of history of all Egypt. The city also flourished as a place of learning during the Greek period because it had schools of philosophy and astronomy, which were frequented by people like Orpheus, Homer, Plato, and many other great Greek philosophers. The fact that archaeologists would discover a statue of Ramesses II is one of the most important archaeological discoveries, which was the claim that was made by one of its researchers. Ramesses II, after all, was a powerful ruler of ancient Egypt. The pharaoh was also known as Ramses the Great and ruled from 1279 to 1213 BCE. Along with the statue of Ramses, they also found a life-size limestone statue of his grandson, Pharaoh Seti II. Lost civilization in a Honduran forest. The site, up until this point, had not been explored, and the team also discovered a remarkable amount of stone sculptures, which had also been untouched since the city was abandoned. The abandoned city is so new and undiscovered that archaeologists still don't really have a name for it. The site is a rarity in the archaeology world, and most have been looted or explored. but this one has been left completely intact with what the team felt may have been offerings to the gods that were left at the foot of the pyramids. Expeditions to search for the mystical White City would begin in the 1920s, with the most famous being done by Theodore Morday in the 1940s. Morday returned from his exploration with thousands of artifacts, claiming that he had found the city, and that the indigenous people there said it contained a giant buried statue of a monkey god. However, he would refuse to tell anyone of its location, as the site may become looted. He later committed suicide, and with his death would take the secret of the city to his grave, and it remained well kept until its recent discovery. The team in charge has decided to keep the location hidden even now, so that no looters may find it, and it will be kept in its preserved condition for further study and exploration. Treasure on a sunken Spanish galleon. Imagine an entire Spanish ship being missing for more than 300 years after it was sank by the British. Well, that ship has finally been discovered off the coast of Colombia and has been named the San Jose Galleon. The ship was discovered near a port city and is considered to be the holy grail of all shipwrecks because it was carrying one of the largest amounts of valuables and treasures to ever be lost at sea. In fact, the cargo aboard is estimated to be worth at least $1 billion. The ship was carrying gold, silver, gems, and jewelry that was all collected in the South American colonies, and was in transport to be brought to Spain's king in order to help finance his War of Secession against the British. The ship never reached its destination as it was sank by the British in 1708, just outside of the port city. There will be a museum built to house all of the lost ship's treasures in the city nearby. An Egyptian Gymnasium. Now, it's no secret that the Egyptians were way ahead of their time when it came to athletics, and as it turns out, they even had gymnasiums. These gyms date back to the 4th century BC, a time when Egypt was ruled by the Greeks after being conquered by Alexander the Great. The Gymnasium was located about 50 miles out of Cairo in the ancient village of Philetaerus, and indications point to the fact that it was founded by King Ptolemy II in the 3rd century BC and was named after his sister. The ancient gymnasium had a large hall for meetings that was decorated with beautifully intricate statues, a dining hall, and even a courtyard. Next to the gym, there would have been a 200-meter track long enough to engage in a race. Gardens would have also surrounded the building to complete the look of an idyllic center of Greek learning. The gymnasium was most likely funded by influential and powerful members of the community who wanted it to be more Greek in style. The young men of the Greek-speaking upper class were trained in sports, learned to read and write, and enjoyed philosophical discussions, which is why many cities that had a Greek influence would have also housed these gymnasiums to make them feel more at home in different surroundings. Researchers also discovered that 1/3 of the population during the time would have been Greek, while the other 2/3 were from Egypt, an ancient Muslim city in Africa. Archaeologists would discover a mosque that was built in the 12th century, as well as Islamic burial grounds and headstones. There were also artifacts from as far as India and China suggesting that the region they were found in may have been a great hub for foreign trade. Today, there are about 250 million Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 30% of the region's total population. Ethiopia features a very strong Christian majority, 2/3 of the population being Christian and the rest being Muslim. So, the recent discovery does break the absence of Islamic archaeology in Ethiopia, since most of the other findings have been related to other things, and the mosques bear similarities to those discovered in Tanzania and Somalia. Now, this may suggest that contact between early Islamic communities in East Africa was in fact part of their lives. This discovery, along with the artifacts from India and China, are the first evidence that links Ethiopia and the Gulf to India and North Africa hundreds of years ago, which is an important part of learning about the past. Prehistoric burrows in South America. Now, if you've been to the rock faces of South America, you may be perplexed as to what exactly you're looking at. It looks kind of strange, with smooth-walled tunnels cut through the earth, but what it actually is quite surprising. As it turns out, hundreds of these formations can be found in certain regions of Brazil and Argentina, some of them so large that you can actually stand up in them. They may look like your ordinary cave, but these tunnels were clearly made by something with enormous claws. A new research team has a suggestion and can now identify and classify these cave dwellings as something that's much more unique. There are no digging animals that are large enough in the world today to have created these tunnels, since the largest of them can be 6 feet tall and 13 feet across. So you would have to delve much deeper into the distant past. As it turns out, these are actually paleo-burrows. During the Ice Age, in which scientists claim happened over 10,000 years ago, there would have been plenty of creatures like mastodons and saber-toothed cats. However, they would not have had the claws to make these burrows. What was discovered, though, is that there were types of giant armadillos and giant ground sloths who could have. The sloths of the Ice Age weren't the cute and cuddly dreamers that they are today. In fact, there were 2 types, the Megatherium and the Eremitherium, who could grow bigger than a rhino and were built for burrowing. These guys would have made the largest tunnels found today, and while the smaller ones would have been made by giant armadillos who couldn't quite measure up to make the biggest tunnels created. There have been more than 1,500 paleo-burrows that have been found across southern Brazil and Argentina, which gives you quite the insight on these prehistoric animals and their need for the tunnels they created. The giant squid. Release the Kraken! One of the scariest discoveries in the past decade has been that of the giant squid. Despite its rather unimpressive name, the giant squid is an awe-inspiring animal. Well, maybe terror-inducing animal. In 2006, Japanese fishermen began to report seeing freakishly large tentacles climbing up the sides